Welcome to the deep dive. Today we are really getting into some heavy territory.
Yeah.
We're tackling Friedrich Nietzsche's The Antichrist.
Heavy is one word for it. It's probably one of the most, let's say, provocative texts in modern philosophy. It's really Nietzsche's final, no-holds-barred assault on Western values.
Exactly. It's not just a gentle critique. It feels more like a declaration of war. And our goal today, for you listening, is to kind of peel back the layers, get past the shock value maybe.
Right. We need to understand the actual philosophical structure he's building, his definitions of good and evil, power. They're completely radical, and it's all part of this systematic critique of Christian morality.
Yeah, that transvaluation he talks about, turning everything upside down.
Precisely. And you have to remember the context. This book, The Antichrist, was meant to be just the first part of a massive work he planned, The Will to Power.
Which he never finished, sadly.
No, but the subtitle he planned for it tells you everything. An attempt at a transvaluation of all values. He wasn't thinking small here. He wanted to literally rewrite our moral code.
And he sets the bar incredibly high for even reading it, doesn't he, in the preface?
Oh, absolutely. He says straight up, this book belongs to the most rare of men. Perhaps not one of them is yet alive.
Wow. Talk about filtering your audience.
It's not just ego, though. I mean, maybe a bit, but it's also setting conditions. He's saying you need a certain kind of mind, a certain strength to even engage with this.
Like what?
Yeah.
What kind of reader is he looking for?
Well, he talks about intellectual integrity to the verge of hardness, someone used to living on mountaintops.
Meaning detached, above the fray.
Exactly, above the wretched gabble of politics and nationalism, as he puts it. Independent thinking.
And then there's that bit about truth, that you shouldn't care if it helps you or destroys you.
Yes, that's maybe the most demanding part. Indifference to whether truth brings profit or, well, fatality. You have to value truth itself, raw truth, more than comfort, more than anything.
You need the courage for the forbidden, he says. The courage to follow ideas where they lead, even if it's into uncomfortable, morally gray areas. A labyrinth.
It demands a kind of self-mastery, holding yourself together when foundational beliefs are being, frankly, demolished. He's signaling right away this isn't for everyone. It's inherently anti-democratic in its intended audience.
Okay, so he sets the stage. Where does he begin the actual argument, the transvaluation itself?
He starts with the affirmation. Before tearing down the old values, he needs to establish the new ones. Or maybe the eternal ones he believes Christianity buried. And he does this by first defining a new type of person.
The Hyperborean.
That's the one, the Hyperboreans. He borrows this from mythology. Pindar wrote about them. People living happily beyond the north, beyond the ice, beyond death.
So it's a metaphor for living outside the constraints of, well, us, modern Western civilization.
Precisely. Outside its gloom, its morality, its whole way of being, which he sees as resigned and tame. The Hyperborean has rediscovered life, found happiness where others only see danger or nothingness.
And this leads to his new definitions, the core of the new value system.
Yes. He lays out this formula of happiness based on the core life instinct, the will to power. It's a radical redefinition.
Okay, well, let's break those down. What does he say is good?
It's straightforward, almost biological in a way. What is good? Whatever augments the feeling of power, the will to power, power itself in man. Good is that feeling of growing stronger, of mastering something.
And evil.
Just as blunt. What is evil? Whatever springs from weakness, decline, submission, anything that lessens life, that's evil in his book.
And happiness ties into this directly.
Absolutely. What is happiness? The feeling that power increases, that resistance is overcome.
So happiness isn't about being peaceful or content. It's about the struggle, the overcoming.
Exactly. It's dynamic. It's about growth, effort, conflict even. Not rest. Rest is decay. For Nietzsche, happiness is more power.
Which flips the idea of virtue on its head too, right?
Completely. He scraps virtue in the Christian sense, meekness, humility. He replaces it with efficiency.
Virtue, like the Renaissance Italians use the term.
Precisely. Virtue. Strength, skill, mastery in action, masculine competence, unburdened by guilt. And this leads to, well, perhaps the most shocking principle he states early on. The weak and the botched shall perish. First principle of our philanthropy, and one should help them to it.
Wow. Okay. That's directly challenging basically all modern ethics, helping the weak perish.
It's brutal, no doubt, but it follows logically from his premise. If weakness is the root of evil, then preserving weakness is multiplying evil. It's rejecting pity as a foundation for morality.
Which connects to his views on evolution, I suppose. He wasn't a fan of the idea of progress for everyone.
Not at all. He thought the modern idea of humanity steadily progressing as a whole was a democratic illusion, a leveling instinct.
So what was the goal then, if not overall progress?
The focus shifts entirely. It's not about lifting the average, it's about breeding the highest type of human, the exceptional individual. What type of person, he asks, is most valuable, the most worthy of life?
The Superman prototype.
Yes, or the potential for it. He saw these higher types appearing throughout history, but almost like happy accidents, not as something society deliberately aimed for.
Because society is afraid of them.
That's his diagnosis. The majority fears the exceptional, the strong, the independent. So the majority instinctively wills the opposite type into existence.
The domestic animal, the herd animal, the sick brute man, the Christian, as he puts it quite harshly.
Yes. He even claims the modern European has fallen far below the European of the Renaissance. So evolution for Nietzsche doesn't automatically mean improvement. It can absolutely mean decay, degeneration.
Okay, so that sets up his affirmation of power and the higher type. Now let's dive into the critique side. Christianity as the embodiment of decadence. What exactly does he mean by decadence?
Fundamentally, for Nietzsche, decadence is physiological. It's a loss of instinct. An animal or a person or even a whole culture is decadent when it loses its instinct for what's good for it, what promotes its life.
And starts choosing things that are harmful instead.
Exactly. It chooses self-injury. Life itself, he says, is this instinct for growth, for accumulating power, for survival. When that will to power falters, you get decay, decadence. And he argues all our modern highest values are actually decadence values.
And Christianity is the prime example.
The ultimate example. He sees it as having systematically drained life of this vital will, replacing strength with a kind of disguised nihilism, a denial of this world.
And the central mechanism for this, the virtue he attacks most fiercely, is pity.
Pity, yes. He sees it as profoundly dangerous. Physiologically, he calls it a depressant. It works against all the tonic passions, the things that make you feel alive and strong, like courage, pride, even healthy aggression.
How does pity make you lose power?
When you pity someone, you're essentially taking on their suffering. You're lowering your own energy, becoming infected by their weakness. It multiplies misery rather than overcoming it.
So it's a direct strike against, well, basic compassion as we understand it. He argues it actually gets in the way of natural selection.
Yes, that's the evolutionary argument. Pity thwarts the law of natural selection because it preserves what is ripe for destruction. It actively fights for the failures that condemned the weak.
And this makes life itself seem gloomy?
Gloomy and dubious, yes. He sees pity as the core technique of nihilism. It pretends to offer salvation or nirvana or heaven, but psychologically, its real effect is to make you devalue this life, to wish for its end, even if that wish is masked in religious language.
It's interesting you mentioned Schopenhauer earlier. He saw pity as central, but he was hostile to life.
Exactly. Nietzsche admired Schopenhauer's honesty about his life negation, but Nietzsche affirms life. So he looks back further to someone like Aristotle. Aristotle saw pity as a sickly and dangerous state of mind.
Something to be purged, right?
Through tragedy. Right. The Greeks understood the danger of cultivating weakness. Nietzsche is calling for a similar kind of mental hygiene. We need to be like doctors. He says, unmerciful here, wield the knife here, meaning apply intellectual rigor, cut away the sentimentality.
And who promotes this pity-based morality? Not the strong, surely.
No, it's a weapon of the weak. He calls Christian ethics a democratic effort to curb the egoism of the strong. It's a conspiracy.
The conspiracy of the Chandala. You should probably explain that term.
Yes, Chandala. It's a term from the Hindu caste system, referring to the lowest, the outcasts. Nietzsche uses it metaphorically for the masses of the weak, the resentful, the psychologically sick, those driven by what he famously called ressentiment.
That simmering resentment of the powerless against the powerful.
Exactly, that hatred that can't express itself directly, so it turns inward, festers, and then gets projected outward as morality. The Chandala conspiracy is the revenge of the lowest against the highest. It wages war to the death against this higher type of man.
How? By redefining values.
Precisely. It takes the characteristics of the strong pride, independence, ambition, and labels them as evil. And it takes the characteristics of the weak humility, obedience, pity, and labels them good. That's how the weak gain control, by moralizing their own condition.
And this doesn't just hold back average people. It can corrupt even brilliant minds. You mentioned Pascal before.
Pascal is his prime example of this tragedy. a man with a first-rate intellect, immense power. But Christianity, Nietzsche argues, convinced Pascal that his own intellect, his own strength, was sinful, was a source of error tied to original sin.
So Pascal turned his power against himself.
Yes, self-abasement. His intellect was destroyed by Christianity, not by some innate flaw. It's the ultimate victory of the Chandala instinct, getting the strong to neutralize themselves through guilt.
Okay, so the moral decay stems from pity and weakness propagated by the resentful. But what's the intellectual engine behind this? He points the finger squarely at the theologian, right?
Absolutely. The priests, the theologian, they are the engineers of this system. He calls the theological instinct the most widespread and most subterranean form of falsehood on earth. It's fundamentally dishonest.
Subterranean, meaning hidden, working beneath the surface.
Exactly. The whole priestly system, he claims, is structured to prevent truth from ever gaining ground, because truth would undermine their power, their reason for being.
Which leads to that incredibly provocative statement: whatever a theologian regards as true must be false.
It's designed to shock, but it follows from his premise. If the theologian's survival depends on preserving a system built on life denial, then their instincts will always value whatever is most damaging to life, and call that true. Because it serves the system. True and false get flipped.
And this requires faith. How does he define faith in this context? It's not a virtue for him.
Not at all. Faith is psychological self-defense. It's closing one's eyes upon self once for all to avoid suffering the sight of incurable falsehood. It's a willful blindness.
A pathological limitation of vision, he calls it.
Yes. It stops inquiry. It turns potentially reasonable people into men of conviction fanatics. He throws Savonarola, Luther, Rousseau into this category, people who become rigid defenders of a system regardless of evidence.
This brings us to that crucial distinction he makes between a lie and a conviction. Why is a conviction potentially more dangerous?
Well, a simple liar knows they're lying. There's still a connection to reality, even if it's being denied. A man of conviction, however, genuinely believes the lie.
Because the lie has become principled. It serves a deeper purpose.
Exactly. It protects them or their group or their power structure. They've internalized it so deeply they're no longer capable of seeing it as false. They become immune to reason, to facts. They need the conviction to be true.
And this gets passed down.
That's the insidious part. What was a lie in the father often becomes a conviction in the son. The founder might have cynically created the system for power, but the followers inherit it as sacred truth. That's how destructive ideologies perpetuate themselves. It's a flight from intellectual honesty.
And he saw this theological instinct infecting philosophy too, especially German philosophy.
Oh, yes. He blames the legacy of the Protestant pastor, the grandfather of German philosophy. He saw Protestantism itself as a kind of paralysis of reason.
And Kant is the main target here.
Kant is central. Nietzsche argues that German thinkers, often coming from clerical families, embraced Kant because he offered a sophisticated intellectual justification for, essentially, sneaking back to the old Christian moral ideal. A backstairs, he calls it.
How does the categorical imperative duty for duty's sake function that way?
Because it detaches morality from life, from consequences, from happiness. By demanding this abstract duty, Kant smuggled back in the old theological ideas of obedience and guilt, just dressed up in Enlightenment language. Nietzsche insists virtue has to come from us, from our own needs, our own drive to affirm life.
And life affirms itself through pleasure.
Right.
He saw Kant's rejection of pleasure as a sign of this underlying life denial.
Precisely. Pleasure, for Nietzsche, is the sign of correct instinctual action. It signals increasing power, physiological well-being. Kant saw pleasure as an objection to a moral act. That, for Nietzsche, reveals the whole game, a philosophy fundamentally hostile to the body, to instinct, to life itself.
And this whole process inevitably requires twisting the idea of God.
It has to. A healthy culture, he argues, projects its own strength and vitality onto its god. Think of the Greek gods powerful, capable of good and evil, reflecting the full spectrum of life. They demanded respect, even fear.
But when a culture weakens, its god changes too.
The god must change to reflect the people's psychology. As the nation declines, becomes submissive, its god becomes timorous and demure, weakened, stripped of the masculine, assertive virtues. He becomes a god of every man, a nice, harmless, cosmopolitan deity.
Only good.
Only good in that weak, moralizing sense. And the ultimate endpoint of this degeneration is the Christian God. The god is the patron of the sick.
One of the most corrupt concepts ever set up, he says.
Because it represents the systematic removal of everything strong, proud, dangerous from the divine. What's left is basically just the savior aspect, focused on sin and weakness. This god becomes a contradiction of life, making the will to nothingness holy. The god itself becomes proof of the civilization's sickness.
Wow. Okay, to sharpen this critique, he then compares Christianity to Buddhism, doesn't he? He sees both as dealing with suffering, but finds Buddhism far superior.
Yes, it's a fascinating comparison. He actually classifies both as decadent religions in a sense, because they arise from cultures grappling with widespread suffering. But Buddhism gets his respect for its intellectual honesty and realism.
He calls it 100 times as realistic as Christianity. Why?
Several reasons. First, it came after centuries of deep philosophical thought. It wasn't just the sudden revelation based on questionable historical claims. Second, and crucially, Buddhism confronts suffering directly, without needing to invent the concept of sin or a punishing God.
So it's focused on the experience of suffering, not moral guilt.
Exactly. It sees suffering largely as a physiological and psychological issue, particularly excessive sensitiveness to pain. It operates beyond good and evil, in the moral sense.
And its solutions are practical, hygienic.
Very much so. Buddha prescribed things like living in a mild climate, moderating diet, avoiding worry, gentle exercise. It's about achieving peace through discipline, self-awareness, and specific mental techniques to reduce craving and attachment, the roots of suffering.
Even egoism gets a pass.
In a way, focusing on your own spiritual development, your own liberation from suffering, is seen as the one thing needful. It's a sign of philosophical maturity, respecting the individual's path. It's not inherently selfish in the way Christianity frames self-interest as sin.
So Buddhism is for the sophisticated, while Christianity
Is for those at the bottom, he argues. The oppressed, the masses who lack the intellectual tools to deal with suffering rationally. It's cruder, more emotional.
He even calls it barbarism. The goal isn't strength, but making people sick.
That's the shocking claim. Christianity aims to master strong impulses, beasts of prey, not by channeling them, but by making the individual ill, weak, dependent. That's its method for taming or civilizing.
And you see this in his practices.
He points to the obsession with sin, self-criticism, constant prayer that whips up unhealthy emotions, the idea that the highest good, grace, is unattainable through effort, and the hostility to the body, to hygiene.
That point about closing the baths in Spain is quite specific.
It is. He sees it as symbolic of a deep-seated hatred of cleanliness, of the physical, of this worldly well-being. It's all part of the life denial package.
So Buddhism aims for liberation through wisdom. Christianity aims for control through suffering.
That's the contrast he draws. Christianity multiplies suffering in this life by focusing on guilt and sin, all while dangling the promise of a reward in the next life. It's fundamentally dishonest about reality.
And instead of Buddhism's philosophical realism, Christianity relies on psychological tricks. Those three Christian ingenuities.
Yes. Faith, hope, and charity or love. He sees these not as virtues, but as clever psychological manipulations, almost oriental in their subtlety, designed for mass control.
Okay, let's take them one by one. Faith.
The key here is that truth doesn't matter. What matters is belief. It is of very little consequence whether a thing be true or not, so long as it is believed to be true. If you feel saved, you don't need to actually be saved, or even sinful in the first place.
Which shuts down reason immediately.
Instantly. Truth becomes dangerous because it might disrupt the comforting feeling. The search for truth becomes a forbidden road.
Okay, second. Hope.
Hope is the great painkiller. It keeps people going through suffering because the promised reward is so high that no conflict with actuality can dash it. It's always beyond this world, so no earthly failure can disprove it.
He mentions the Greeks saw hope as an evil.
Yes, left in Pandora's box. Because it traps people, makes them endure things they might otherwise fight against or escape. It perpetuates suffering under the guise of comfort.
And third, love or charity.
This is the master stroke psychologically. To make life bearable for the weak, you need to give them something to love intensely. And for that, God has to become relatable, personal.
Young, beautiful, maybe a virgin. Things that appeal to basic human instincts.
Exactly. Things that allow for emotional attachment. Love, Nietzsche says, is the state where man sees things most decidedly as they are not. It's a powerful illusion.
An illusion that makes reality tolerable.
Precisely. The priests understood. Give people an object for their love, even an illusory one, and they can endure almost anything. It numbs them to the harshness of reality. It's a psychological narcotic.
So these psychological tricks need a historical foundation. He connects Christianity back to what he calls the Jewish instinct for falsification.
Yes, he doesn't see Christianity as a complete break. He argues the Jewish people, faced with survival challenges, chose to be at any price. And this required a radical falsification of all nature, of all reality.
How so?
Their priests, he claims, reinterpreted their entire history as a divine drama of sin, punishment, and salvation, centered around obedience to them, the priests. They turned historical events into an idiotic mechanism of salvation, twisting natural cause and effect into a moralistic narrative. This set the template.
And Jesus fits into this, but differently.
This is where it gets really complex and, frankly, controversial. Nietzsche draws a sharp line between the historical Jesus and the Christ of faith created later. He sees the original Jesus as a fascinating psychological type.
A symbolist. What does that mean here?
It means Jesus rejected external reality politics, history, even sin and guilt in the conventional sense as irrelevant. For him, only inner, subjective states were real. Everything external was just a sign, a parable pointing to an inner truth.
So the kingdom of heaven
is a state of the heart, Nietzsche interprets. It's an immediate inner experience of peace, of unity with God available right now, not a future event, not a political kingdom, not something after death.
So Jesus wasn't arguing for doctrines. He wasn't resisting Rome. He denied guilt.
According to Nietzsche's reading, yes. His message was about achieving this inner state. No arguments, no resistance, no concept of punishment, because the kingdom is internal. His death then wasn't a sacrifice for sins.
It was just an example of his way of life, living without resistance, leading inevitably to conflict with the world.
Exactly, a demonstration of the practice, not an atonement. That historical Jesus, the symbolist, died on the cross.
And then came the bad tidings, the disangelium, as Nietzsche calls it, and the culprit is Paul.
Paul is cast as the villain of the piece. The genius of hatred, the ultimate political operator fueled by resentment. Paul, Nietzsche argues, took the potent symbol of Jesus' death and completely twisted its meaning
from an example of a life
into a sacrifice for the forgiveness of sins. Nietzsche calls this appalling paganism. He's claiming Paul reintroduced barbaric sacrificial ideas that Jesus himself had moved beyond.
Why would Paul do that?
Power. Pure and simple. Paul needed a doctrine that could organize the masses, create a movement, establish authority. He shifted the center of gravity of life to the beyond.
With the resurrection story and immortality.
Yes, the lie of the risen Jesus and the shameless doctrine of personal immortality. These inventions, Nietzsche claims, devalued this world, making it merely a preparation for the next. This gave the priests Paul and his successors immense leverage, concepts designed to tyrannize over the masses.
And the church becomes the institutionalization of this betrayal.
It's the final stage of the corruption, moving ever further from Jesus's original symbolism. The church embodies deadly hostility to honesty, nobility, and spontaneous humanity. It's a sickly barbarism.
It had to simplify and vulgarize the message for the masses.
Exactly. Concepts like the other world, the last judgment, the immortality of the soul become, in his view, instruments of psychological torture. Tools for the priest to gain and maintain control by exploiting fear and distress.
Okay, he's laid out the moral and theological critique. Now, how does he trace its actual impact on history? He starts with Rome, right?
Yes, the fall of Rome is Exhibit A. He sees the Roman Empire as this magnificent achievement of organization, law, aristocratic values built against all odds.
And Christianity destroyed it.
Not like an invading army, more like a vampire, he says. It destroyed Rome from within by sucking the vital energy out of it, by turning people's attention away from real things, law, the state, civic duty, this life towards the other world. Those early Christians, the stealthy worms, the anemic vampires, undermine the Roman spirit, turn noble minds against the empire itself. All the discontent and anarchy simmering within the empire got funneled into this new power structure symbolized by the cross.
That's one great ruin, then he points to another, the Renaissance.
Yes, and this one seems to pain him even more. He saw the Renaissance as this incredible moment, the one great war of the past where humanity almost threw off Christian values.
The transvaluation attempt that nearly worked.
Exactly, a triumph of life, of noble values, art, strength, virtue. He even floats the idea of Caesar Borgia, the ultimate Renaissance strongman, becoming pope. That would have been symbolic peak, enthroning life itself in the heart of the old system.
But it failed. Why?
Luther Luther's stupidity, as Nietzsche bluntly puts it. The German monk, driven by the vengeful instincts of an unsuccessful priest, started the Reformation.
But wasn't the Reformation against church corruption?
That's the common view. But Nietzsche argues Luther rebelled not against corruption, but against the life-affirming spirit of the Renaissance itself. He restored the old, guilt-ridden, repressive church mentality, just in a different form. He stopped the transvaluation dead in its tracks.
Making the Renaissance a great futility.
Yes. And Nietzsche bitterly concludes that if humanity never shakes off Christianity, it'll be the Germans' fault for basically undoing the Renaissance progress.
Okay, so ancient Rome, the Renaissance.
Yeah.
How does he connect this to his own time, to modern politics?
He sees the same destructive patterns playing out. Take the idea of democracy and equality, equal rights for all.
Where does that come from for him?
Straight from Christianity. The principle of the equality of all souls before God gets secularized into political equality.
But that's bad because
Because it destroys reverence, hierarchy, the appreciation of difference, the aristocratic attitude of mind, which he thinks is necessary for cultivating greatness. If everyone is declared equal, you level everything down to the lowest common denominator.
he calls this equality principle Christian dynamite.
Yes, because when you give the masses driven by that Chandala instinct, that resentment or the belief that the majority has absolute rights, it leads inevitably to revolution. And Christian values, he says, convert every revolution into a carnival of blood and crime. Resentment unleashed.
And he links this directly to socialism and anarchism.
Directly. He sees socialists as modern apostles to the Chandala, stirring up the working class, undermining their natural pride and skill in work, and teaching them revenge instead of self-improvement.
Anarchists and Christians,
Yeah.
shared ancestors.
In their destructive impulse, yes. Both, he argues, spring from resentment, from an instinct to tear down everything strong, established, and great. It's the weak trying to destroy the conditions that allow the strong to flourish.
So after tracing all this, his final verdict on Christianity is pretty damning.
It's perhaps the most ferocious condemnation in all of philosophy. He calls it the one great curse, the one great intrinsic depravity, the one immortal blemish upon the human race. There's really no ambiguity there.
No, none at all. Okay, so stepping back, the core argument we've unpacked is this massive inversion. The West's values, he claims, are built on weakness, fear, life denial, all engineered by a priestly class.
Right. And his proposed alternative, the Hyperborean ideal, is based on affirming life strength, health, knowledge, the feeling of power increasing. That's the new standard.
And that distinction between a lie and a conviction seems absolutely key to understanding how these decadent systems persist.
It really is. The conviction, the internalized lie that serves a deeper purpose, protects the system and the believer from facing uncomfortable truths. It's a powerful psychological mechanism.
Which brings us to a final thought for you, the listener. We've just spent time digging into Nietzsche's claim that entire value systems can be based on these principled, but ultimately destructive convictions inherited from a theological instinct.
So, think about our own time. We hold many convictions very strongly. Democratic ideals, specific social justice goals, maybe even scientific rationalism itself. We see them as based on truth, on principle. But, applying Nietzsche's lens, could any of the convictions you hold most dear, the ones that feel morally absolute, actually be serving some deeper, perhaps unexamined instinct? Could they be a modern form of that lie, become conviction, shielding you or society from a harder reality, much like the theological falsehoods Nietzsche attacked?
A challenging question to end on. Definitely deep dive. This work doesn't leave you indifferent, that's for sure. Thanks for joining us on this exploration of the Antichrist.
We definitely encourage you, if you're interested, to read the text itself, engage with these ideas directly. It's quite the experience.